There is a clay tablet sitting in the basement archives of the National Museum of Iraq that most people have never heard of. It was excavated from the ancient city of Lagash in 1928, shipped across 3 borders, misclassified as an administrative record, and then largely forgotten for 40 years. When a linguist named Dr. Adnan Harek finally translated it properly in 1974, he didn't publish his findings immediately. He sat on them for 2 years, because what the tablet described wasn't a grain inventory or a land dispute. It was a set of directions. Directions to a place beneath a lake that no longer exists, in a region that geologists now confirm was home to one of the most sophisticated hydrological systems of the ancient world. Today we're going to trace where those directions lead, what modern satellite imaging has found at those coordinates, and why the genetic evidence from communities living in that region rewrites what we thought we knew about Sumerian exploration. If you're drawn to ancient mysteries and the science that keeps proving them stranger than expected, subscribe. We cover this every week. The tablet is cataloged as IM-76291. It dates to approximately 2350 BCE, placing it squarely in the Akkadian period, when Mesopotamian civilization was at the height of its geographic reach. The text is written in an older Sumerian dialect than the administrative documents found alongside it, which already told Herrick this wasn't bureaucratic record-keeping. Administrative tablets used contemporary language. Ritual and navigational texts often preserved archaic forms. The dialect alone suggested the content was being copied from something older, possibly much older. The tablet describes a place called Abzu-Ki, not Abzu in the abstract theological sense, the primordial underground water that appears throughout Sumerian cosmology. Abzu-Ki. The Ki suffix means place in Sumerian, a specific physical location of the primordial underground water. The distinction matters because Sumerian scribes were meticulous about language. When they meant a spiritual concept, they used the concept alone. When they meant a physical location, they marked it. Abzu-Ki is a marked location. The directions given in the text use 3 reference points: a mountain that swallows the northern star for 7 nights each year, a river whose mouth faces the wrong direction, and a lake whose waters feed both the sky and the stone below. These descriptions follow the same navigational pattern found in Sumerian merchant texts, the same structure used to document actual trade routes with verifiable landmarks. Researchers who have spent years analyzing Sumerian navigation language identify this 3-point system immediately. It's not poetry, it's a coordinate system. The first landmark took decades to identify. A mountain that swallows the northern star for 7 nights each year sounds mythological until you understand how ancient navigators track stellar positions. Polaris, the northern star, can be obscured by mountain peaks at specific latitudes and specific times of year. This is not metaphor. At latitudes between 38 and 42 degrees north, certain mountain configurations will block Polaris for approximately 7 nights during winter months. Dr. Elena Fursova at the Russian Academy of Sciences spent 3 years in the 1990s mapping these occultation zones across Central Asia and the Caucasus. Her paper identified 11 possible mountain systems matching the description. When cross-referenced with the other 2 landmarks, that number drops to 1. The Zagros mountain range, specifically its northern extension into what is now Azerbaijan and Armenia, contains a peak configuration that occludes Polaris for between 6 and 8 nights, depending on the year. The Sumerians were at the edge of their known world here. Tin came from further east, but copper came largely from this region. They were not strangers to these mountains. They had been traveling these routes for generations. The second landmark is more immediately verifiable, a river whose mouth faces the wrong direction. Rivers flow to the sea. Their mouths face outward. A river whose mouth faces the wrong direction is a river flowing inland, away from the sea, into enclosed terrain with no external drainage. Hydrologists call these endorheic systems. The water flows inward, collects, and either evaporates or seeps underground. The ancient world had several of these, but only one sits at the intersection of the Zagros occultation zone and the third clue. The Araxes River, in its ancient configuration, fed into the Caspian Basin through a system that partially reversed during flood seasons due to a now-collapsed natural dam structure. Ancient observers traveling through the region at the right time of year would have seen this river behaving in exactly the way the tablet describes, its mouth appearing to face inland, its waters pushing backward against the flow. This is documented in Armenian chronicles from the medieval period, describing the river's strange behavior as a sign of divine will. It wasn't divine will, it was hydrology, but it was real. The third landmark is the one that took the longest to connect to physical evidence, a lake whose waters feed both the sky and the stone below. Water feeding the sky suggests evaporation on a massive scale, a lake known for its mist, its atmospheric contribution, visible from distance. Water feeding the stone below is harder, until you understand karst geology. In limestone and dolomite terrain, lakes don't just evaporate, they drain. Sinkholes, fracture systems, and underground rivers carry lake water directly into cave networks below the surface. The ancient observation of a lake seemingly feeding downward into the earth is an accurate description of a karstic drainage system, and the region where the Araxes historically ran contains some of the most extensive karst geology in the Near East. Lake Sivan in modern Armenia is the most obvious candidate. It sits at high altitude, generates extraordinary levels of atmospheric mist, and the surrounding geology is heavily karstic. More significantly, a 2017 geological survey commissioned by the Armenian Ministry of Nature found evidence of massive subterranean drainage channels beneath the lake's southern shore, channels large enough to have carried significant water volume in antiquity. The lake feeding the stone below was not mythology, it was observation. Now, here is where the modern evidence becomes difficult to dismiss. In 2009, a joint American-Armenian archaeological team conducting survey work near the southern shore of Lake Sevan discovered something unexpected, not in the lake, beneath it. Ground-penetrating radar used to map sediment layers for a separate study picked up anomalous returns at approximately 40 meters below the lakebed. The returns indicated hollow spaces, not small hollow spaces, chambers. The team published a brief notation in a geophysical journal, flagged it as requiring follow-up study, and moved on. The follow-up study has not been funded, but the genetic data didn't wait for the archaeologists. A 2020 population genetics study analyzing ancient DNA from burial sites across Armenia, Azerbaijan, and northern Iran identified something that the research team found puzzling enough to flag in their conclusions. A cluster of genetic markers found in Bronze Age remains from sites around Lake Sevan showed unexpected similarity to Mesopotamian lowland populations from the same period. Not similarity along a gradient, the kind you'd expect from gradual migration and intermarriage across connected territories. Clustered similarity, geographically concentrated, appearing and then disappearing from the regional record over approximately 4 generations. The researchers offered 3 explanations: a short-duration trading colony, a religious pilgrimage community, or an unexplained migration event. What none of them considered, because it wasn't within the scope of their study, was the possibility that the Sumerians had established a sustained operational presence at this location for a specific practical purpose, the same purpose that the tablet IM76291 describes: accessing what lay beneath. The Sumerian word used in the tablet for what they expected to find in Abzuki is interesting. It's a compound term that translates most directly as the knowledge of the first water. In Sumerian cosmology, the Abzu, the underground water, was not simply water. It was associated with wisdom, with hidden order, with the foundations of how the physical world was structured. Enki, the god of the Abzu, was specifically the god of craft, intelligence, and practical knowledge. The Sumerians were not going to Abzuki for religious reasons. They were going for information, and they believed the physical location held that information in material form. What could a physical location hold that an ancient civilization would interpret as the knowledge of the first water? Geothermal systems, mineral deposits, underground water sources that behave in ways that defy surface logic. In karst cave systems beneath lake beds, you find all of these. You find mineral formations that ancient observers would have found extraordinary. You find water behavior that seems to contradict basic observation. You find enclosed environments where temperature and atmosphere are unlike anything on the surface. And you find, in limestone caves specifically, the kind of acoustic phenomena that ancient people consistently associated with the voice of the divine. This is not speculation. The connection between cave acoustics and ancient ritual has been documented extensively. Sites across Europe and the Near East show prehistoric art concentrated in areas of maximum acoustic resonance. Ancient peoples recognized these chambers as different, as special, as having properties that the surface world lacked. If the Sumerians found a cave system beneath a high-altitude lake, they wouldn't have described it as a geological curiosity. They would have described it as the home of Enki, as Abzuki. The tablet ends with a phrase that Harek translated as "the way in is also the way the earth speaks." For 40 years, this was interpreted as a poetic closing, a ritual flourish. But cave researchers who reviewed the translation in 2011 recognized it immediately. It is an acoustic description. The resonance in a cave entrance, the way sound moves differently in the threshold space between surface and interior, was being noted as a landmark. The way in is also the way the earth speaks. You find the entrance by listening. Modern communities living in the villages around the southern shore of Lake Savan maintain a tradition that outside researchers have cataloged as folklore. On certain mornings in deep winter, villagers say, "You can hear the lake breathe, a sound rising from the ground near the water, low and rhythmic, like something moving beneath the surface." Geologists have attributed this to gas movement through underwater sediment, a known phenomenon in deep cold lakes. But the villagers have a different explanation. They say their ancestors knew what made the sound. They say the people who came from the south, long ago, taught them to listen for it as a sign that the way was still open. We don't know what is in those chambers beneath Lake Sevan. We don't know if the anomalous returns from the 2009 radar survey represent natural voids or something that required construction. We don't know what the Sumerian presence at this location was actually doing, or for how long, or what they found. What we do know is that the tablet is real, the landmarks are identifiable, the genetic evidence confirms Mesopotamian people were there, and the geological evidence suggests there is something beneath that lake that has not been examined. The tablet I, M76291, is not a myth, it is a record. 4,000 years old. Written in an archaic dialect, specifically because the scribe wanted to preserve language older than his own time. Sitting in a basement archive in Baghdad, pointing at a lake in the Armenian highlands, where radar has found hollow spaces and villagers still listen for the earth to speak. We haven't looked yet. That is what makes it extraordinary. We know exactly where to look. We simply haven't looked.